Good afternoon. I'm glad to see my friend Pastor Marion and Pastor Kim. We're back for another session to talk about what's on our mind. And one thing that has come up is this issue of gender and how gender relates to kind of the spectrum of issues that we're talking about. So um, I don't know who wants to go first. I'll just throw it out to either one of you, but um, when I approach the issue of gender, how is it different? How is the issue of gender different than just LGBTQ issues generally? Yeah, or is it different? I don't know.
Well, Kim, I'm wondering, so this topic came up because we were just talking about something that happened in Kim's context. So, Kim, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, so I was just wondering because it seems like when you have LGBTQIA plus, and then you have SSA, which is same sex attracted, and then to know that that doesn't represent the LGBT because that is just like an acronym of so many different pieces. And that it has to do maybe with trans being so unique. And so I would like to know more about the trans thing because um, I know stuff about like people who do drag. And so they just seem to kind of be part time. Uh, they take on that role part time or maybe full time. I don't know. It's all new to me. And I was wondering if you two might have a little bit more that you can add to that conversation to bring clarity for me.
Absolutely. I think we can do
Hmm?
that, right, Jeremy? You got this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. When I think about the acronym, because you brought the acronym first, I, I always want to say first, no one should ever be afraid of an acronym, right? We're talking about humans and people. And that means however billion people there are on the planet, that's how unique each individual is. So an acronym can only do so much. What an acronym can do, it's trying to capture a community that, I guess in the context of what we've been talking about over these episodes, a community that falls outside of a traditional view of a man and a woman and a traditional view of sexuality. It's an entire spectrum and an entire reality that might it's probably easier to say what it's not than to say what it is. So if we start with the premise that many people fairly believe that there's a man and a woman and those are the only two people that should be married, that's a view of sexuality. There's the spectrum. The acronym represents probably almost anybody who falls outside of that, which includes issues surrounding gender identity, gender expression. You brought up the issue of the nuance. What's the difference between someone who considers themselves transgendered versus what you might see when you go out to a club, someone who is just dressing in drag? Is there a difference? Yes, and we can talk more about that, but I always like to keep people as the starting place of it's just a large spectrum of folks who would fall outside of what would be considered the traditional Christian view of a man and a woman, in a marriage. That's how I look at it.
That's a great way to look at it. Absolutely. And there are some folks who are transgender who would consider themselves as part of this man woman traditional Christian view of gender. So just to say it, as Jeremy pointed out, it is this wide variety of being, ways of being in the world. Just like if someone said, like I would say, I'm a Christian. So you know what that means, but there's a lot about that you don't know what that means. Like, does that mean, am I Catholic? Am I Baptist? Do I believe in the virgin birth or I don't? All those different things that go into being a Christian. I mean, there's a million different ways to be a Christian. Every one of us who's Christian is a little bit different. It's the same with the LGBT community and particularly with trans. So one thing to know about is trans is about gender identity, and it's different from the LGBs, from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, which is about attraction. So LGB is about romantic attraction to someone. Transgender has nothing to say about who someone is attracted to at all, at all. So someone who is transgender could be heterosexual. They don't need to be lesbian or gay or bisexual. It's totally different. And in fact, some transgender folks really don't like the idea of being under the LGBT umbrella, in terms of thinking, okay, these are LGBT folks, they're part of this community. Some trans folks are like, no, that's not who I am. I'm a traditional Christian married to the opposite gender, and I don't want anything to do with that community. Other transgender folks are like, yes, these are my people. So you can kind of see what I mean about it's so individual. One thing that we can all agree on is that it means that whatever your birth certificate said, it isn't how you are. So in other words, I'm born, the doctor puts female on my birth certificate, but when I think about who I am and I look in the mirror, if I was transgender, I would expect to see someone who looked male in the mirror because that would match who I am inside. For some faiths, they think about having a pre-mortal life, and they think about transgender as someone who, before they were born in this world, they were a different gender. And then they were born into this world, a gender different from what they were before. And so they're meant to have that experience, and then they go back to the previous gender. So it's, a whole spiritual type of experience for them. There's different cultures think about it different ways. Our Western culture has a unique way to think about it. All over the world, they think about it differently. We hear about Native Americans and Two-Spirit culture. Perhaps you've heard of that. In different cultures, people who are transgender are revered. In some parts of the United States, a lot of parts of the United States, people who are transgender are at greater risk of attack, of physical attack and all kinds of attacks. So there's that spectrum of it too. But it's different. And I'm going to share my screen and show you something called the gender unicorn. So if you look at this, and this is put together by the Trans Student Educational Resources. Their materials are fantastic. So if anyone wants to learn more, I highly recommend that you check them out. They have wonderful things. So everyone has a gender identity and everyone has a gender expression. And I'll talk about myself so that you have an example. So gender identity, and that's the whole person. And you can see on this screen, the green dots indicating, okay, the whole unicorn here is the gender identity. For me, I identify as female. I'm a woman. My gender expression varies, however. So gender expression is what the world would see you as. So in other words, if I wanted to look very much like a female, I'd wear a dress, I'd wear a lot of makeup. So we can think about, okay, stereotypically, what does a woman look like? For my personal gender expression, I am someplace in between feminine and masculine. It depends on the day. It depends on what I feel like wearing. It depends on professional considerations. It depends on am I going to a family event or am I going to be with friends? So all of that goes into what I look like. And we all do that. We all put on different clothes. We all do our hair in different ways. Same kind of thing, gender expression. Sex assigned at birth, that's what's on your birth certificate, like we talked about. So there's female and male are the two common. 1 out of every 1,000 births is a combination of both female and male organs, either that a doctor can see or that are inside. And that's called intersex. So think about that. That's 1 out of 1,000 births are intersex. And often it's the doctor who will look at a newborn baby and just make a decision right there. Other times the doctor will go to the parents and say, okay, we have both sets of genitals here. What would you like us to do? And sometimes parents will decide right then. Sometimes parents will say, well, let's leave the child and let's see if they seem to be more of a female or more of a male. And that happens. I also know adults who had no idea that they had both sex characteristics in them until they reached adulthood and beyond, and then went to the doctor, and the doctor did some investigating to find out why things weren't just right and realized, okay, this person's actually intersex, and they had no idea about it before. So that intersex falls under the transgender umbrella. Not all intersex folks would want to say, I'm transgender. Some would want to say, I'm intersex. It's different. And some would say, I don't want any part of the LGBT community. And some intersex folks would say, oh, that's me. I'm part of that community. So you can see again, we're back to everyone's different. Yeah, Jeremy.
So I don't want to interrupt you, Pastor Marion, but
No, please do.
this is so good. I have a question as you're walking through the image. Under gender identity, it says there's a column for male, woman, male, man, and then the third column, other genders. Is this what intersex is?
That is a terrific question. Thank you for asking that question. Have either of you heard of the word gender queer or gender non-binary?
Yeah.
No.
Mhm.
Okay. So what that means is if you are something other than a, a female or a male, you can be gender non-binary. Some transgender folks will say, well, I'm not transgender, I'm gender non-binary. Some trans folks wouldn't go that route. They'd say, no, I'm transgender. I'm not doing the gender non-binary thing. All that is a way that people choose to identify themselves. So for example, 2 of my children identify as they don't identify as, they are transgender. 2 of my children are transgender. I identify as gender non-binary, meaning that I am mostly a woman female, that mostly that totally matches my birth certificate. Other times I feel more male than female. So for me, it's more accurate to say, okay, I'm more a gender non-binary. That fits who I am as a person. But that's just a label. So it doesn't change Marion that you know. It's just my sharing how I think about myself with you. And it may be something you can see depending on my gender expression. If we call it butching it up, if you see me and if my hair is slicked back, like the other time we recorded, I said, oh no, my hair is really slicked back. I look really butch today. And but I was feeling more feminine inside. So I looked at that and I thought, oh, but then other times when I feel more masculine, I'm like, okay, well, I don't want my hair to be so poofy. I'm going to change that up a bit. And so that's all it is. It's kind of playing with that. And you can see it in younger folks. 30% of all younger folks identify as some type of gender non-binary. They don't, I'm so conditioned being this elderly person that I am. I think about, okay, well, there's female and there's male. And the younger folks, it's not true for them. They think about it in very different ways. And they play with it. And it's okay for them to play with it. But all of this gender identity and gender expression, transgender, intersex, doesn't have anything to do with who you're physically attracted to. So that's the yellow and the red, and who you're emotionally attracted to. So that's different. That's heart stuff. That's emotional stuff. It doesn't have to do with your body, because a female person can be attracted to females. A male person can be attracted to males. That's the homosexual, the gay kind of thing. But for transgender folks, they can be attracted to either. And some transgender folks are lesbian or gay. Some transgender folks are attracted to the opposite sex. And it just varies by person. What other questions do you have? What does this bring up for you? I know it's a lot. I talk about this all the time, so it's but I know it's a lot if you don't necessarily think about it a lot.
So another question I have, I want to ask is, I think, and here I am, a gay man, not knowing almost all of this. Not or not, having contacted it because you pointed out, Pastor Marion, that like this community is grouped together, whether they actually feel like they're part of the same community or not. We're kind of grouped together as a larger set of folks, but it is true, and I admit, like I didn't know anyone transgender until I moved to DC. I was in my late 30s before I met anybody transgender. And what would you say to the person who gets tripped up over the idea that there's anything more than a male and a female? This idea that like there's only two options biologically to have children, therefore they're seeing everything through that lens. I thought you touched on it earlier when you were talking about expression and identity and femininity versus masculinity. But what would you say directly to someone who says, no, I don't want to hear this because there's only a male and a female can produce a child, therefore there's only two genders. How would you kind of walk someone through that sort of that trip up line?
Well, I think it depends on if if it's a theological belief, then I mean, to me, bless your heart. If that's what your theology is, I fully affirm that. And I would say, "Hey, you need to meet my transgender kids. Let's go have pizza together." And so you can see that there are other types of people in the world, while at the same time fully respecting the person's theology. It's not up to me to change anyone's theology. If it's a matter of, well, I don't know anyone that's transgender or genderqueer. There's just females and there's males. I don't believe that there are folks out there like that. Then again, I'd say, have pizza with my kids, or would you like to meet my friend who's transgender? Because I think a lot of times as people, we kind of know about other folks, but if we haven't met them, we don't really know about other folks. And it's a matter of just getting to know people. And there's a lot of false stereotypes out there, particularly around transgender and gender non-binary, because it can be kind of scary for folks. I mean, we've seen the bathroom laws and I don't minimize that because people really do get concerned about things. To me, it's much more important to talk about it and to say, okay, I understand you're worried about your granddaughter in the bathroom, that there'd be a man in a dress. But let me tell you that it's not about a man putting on a dress and going into the ladies' room. It's about a transgender female to male person in the men's room that's going to get attacked, that we need to make sure that everyone is safe. So we can all agree on that. How can everyone be safe? How can a transgender person be safe in the restroom that matches their gender identity, whether or not it exactly matches their gender expression? Because for some transgender folks, if they transition later in life, they are not going to what's called pass as readily. You'll be able to see if it's a male to female, you'll be able to see the stubble, for example, or the more male features. Or if there's an economic consideration where, okay, I am female, I was marked male on my birth certificate, I want to live my life as a woman, and yet I've got the typical male characteristics of, say, a large Adam's apple. For some wealthy folks, they can have surgery. If you're not wealthy, you can't have surgery. And then you don't pass as well, and you're at risk for getting beat up. So it goes back to, how can the granddaughter in the restroom be safe? How can the transgender person be safe? We can all agree on that. And let's work together on that.
Hey, Pastor Marion, you actually made me think of another question. You mentioned when you were talking, um, not understanding this whole realm can be scary. What advice would you give to someone who believes that they uh, know someone transgendered, but they don't know whether they should talk about it or ask questions? Like, how do you explain to folks who are coming in contact, possibly with transgender people, what would you say to them about how to interact, maybe with your children? Have they come across your children, or should they ask any questions, or should the transgender person be the person to bring something up? How do we go about having this dialogue? Because you're right, Pastor Marion. I'll say first. Um, I didn't have any perceptions of transgender people because I didn't know any, but my perceptions began to come into clarity when I had my first transgender friend. But I'll admit I had to ask her lots of questions about how do I address you, what is uncomfortable. It worked out for me because she was my friend. But what would you tell someone who may know someone transgender about how you respectfully interact with them? That was a long question, but I think you get the gist of it, which is um, this can be a scary issue for lots of people. How can people move to dialogue?
It can be really hard for folks because a lot of transgender people, probably your friend is one of them, they're used to hearing lots of questions. If it's a transgender person that can pass well, so in other words, insider language, they're not made. So being made means, okay, someone figured out that you're transgender. You didn't pass, they figured it out. And often what happens is people will ask questions, sometimes very rude, invasive questions, like, asking about someone's genitals. Oh, have you had the surgery? Questions like that that are really pretty rude. So if you think about, okay, what are acceptable questions to ask another human being? Just because someone's transgender doesn't mean that it's a license for us to ask rude questions. So for one, just to say that, because so many of my transgender friends say that every day someone asks them, well, have you had the surgery? Or, you know, often it's a way to just be mean to a transgender person. And then the folks who come along after someone's been mean and just have a humble, honest question, then it's like the 50th question this week for the transgender person. It's like, oh, so I say wait for the transgender person to say something. And then that invites conversation. So say your friend is male to female transgender, and they say, oh, I went out to buy a new dress over the weekend and I tried on a bunch of different dresses. It was really kind of hard to find one that fit just right, but I found this one. How do I look? So it's an opportunity for you to affirm your friend and say, wow, I love your dress. You look great. And I'm sorry it was hard for you. Is that typical? Or to ask a follow-up question that the transgender person can either dive in deeper and say, yes, I'm very tall and I'm a size 13 shoe. It's so hard for me to get shoes. Or, they'll say something else that invites you in. Another time they might just not want to talk about it. And you can tell. It's just like with anyone else. But as you become closer friends with someone, then you can ask them questions because you've already developed that relationship of honest give and take about things that you wouldn't talk to a stranger about.
Would it be? I really like that. Would it be fair to say this issue wouldn't be so scary if we all treated one another, regardless of how we're perceiving one another in any realm, just with respect? Like, I suppose I have a license to ask more intrusive questions to people I know better. But as I'm interacting with people and perceiving folks, just be respectful. And I think the interaction can go well. Is that an oversimplification, or what do you think?
No, absolutely. It's about respect. And I will also say that respect is required of people who believe in theologically God created male and female. Those folks are dear to my heart, and those folks deserve respect too. So I don't buy into the culture wars thing where, okay, only these people deserve respect because XYZ. No, every single person deserves respect. And particularly as Christians, we're called to love each other.
Yeah.
And how do we show love to each other, even across difference? Well, Jesus did that. We can just look to the example of Jesus, and we can love all people like Jesus did.
I think that's a great perspective to bring out, Marion, to speak into that even those who have the very strict male female view is also to be respected. I mean, they have boundaries um, and just need help and understanding as well. I've heard several say, oh, the language that's all tied up with gender and all of that has come about to be more easy to talk about. It becomes very hard to navigate for those who don't have all that vocabulary, and they need grace, they need help finding their way through all that, and feeling very frustrated that the the community that is dealing with so much gender fluidity, I guess, is that the way I should say it?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
that they feel frustrated that it feels like the rules keep changing on them. And I think they want to be able to connect, especially when it's a loved one, loved friend, or a loved family member that they're trying to connect with, but just feeling that frustration because of all of that all the categories that are in the head in the thinking process have now uh, they've been exploded into whole new possibilities. And what do you do with that, So anyway, I appreciate the kindness there as well. Yeah.
Pastor Kim, I was thinking as you were talking how easy it would be, since um, this issue, the issues in this area can be confusing or unfamiliar, how easy it would be to say, well, since if you believed there was just a man and a woman and that's it, it's too, fluidity doesn't have any, thinking about fluidity doesn't have any value in my space, and to say, okay, I'll stop thinking about it at this point. But I'll put this out because this is what challenged me more than anything. And again, as a gay man, I was challenged in this area when I met someone and know someone personally, where both people in the relationship are trans. Said another way, each person was born one gender, each person transitioned to the opposite gender, and they married. These questions have to be asked and grappled with the church, because to dismiss the community for not understanding how it works or being concerned about its fluidity is to dismiss this fundamental question that of my friend's relationship. By all accounts, they are in a heterosexual relationship, even by a traditional biblical standard. The sole issue being they live their lives, they express their lives the opposite way they were born, but they've entered a marriage that by all accounts would be approved in a traditional context. So I only say this to say that it is too easy, um, to say, well, since it's fluid and it's relative, and I believe in certainty, that I don't need to think about these issues. But um, but there are many reasons why we want to think about these. These are people, and and the issue is much more complex and than sometimes a dismiss can make it be. And so I think that, like, it goes back to what Pastor Marion was saying earlier. The best way to understand this issue, the best way to understand people, is to know people. And I feel like, um, if there's even like a ray of light in a heart that says, I want to know more, I want to understand this God, to express it to God, and say to God, like, I want to be open to all your people. God will provide a way, usually through relationship, for discovery to begin. I think actually God did that for me. I mean, perhaps I had a bit of, um, as a gay man, I just presumed I didn't need to know about this issue. See, even calling it an issue sounds terrible. Like it's like this is some sort of issue, right? But this reality is something that doesn't impact me. Therefore, I don't need to think about it. When in reality, when I opened myself up to it, I began knowing people and learning and seeing more expressions of who God is in people. And so, I know the issue can be tough, and I know it's an issue that can be dismissed. But I just think it's an awesome opportunity to expand our view of God by expanding our understanding of God's creation. That's it's not an issue. It's God's creation. It's it's been turned into an issue because the media and the politics they create it. They turn these things, these conversations into issues when these are just people. They're just people. At the end of the day, if you remember nothing we say, they're just people. You can forget all the language, all the letters. You can forget everything that's been said, but they're beautiful people. And I would invite anyone into relationship with all people, but trans people included.
Jeremy, in your church, they're known for being very acclimating and being in as a conservative church, even if I can use that term, conservative. But what kind of provisions did they make for trans, or especially like when we think about bathroom things, or I'm thinking about like groups, like where there's men's stuff and women's stuff. How's all that handled? Do you know?
Great question, Pastor Tim. Um, so I will actually hope to invite the person I'm thinking of, but so she can tell her own story. But I'll tell a story in general about our church. Um, I know of a person who went on a missions trip with our church, and she shares the story openly, and who came out as trans on the trip. She, as Pastor Marion was talking about, could pass. Nobody knew, and she was received with open arms. I think what it comes down to in terms of like church corporate is, and this is just my opinion. I can't speak on behalf of NCC, right? But I perceive that just as a layperson, I perceive the rush to create policy becomes the trip line. I think Pastor Marion, you used a good example earlier. Oftentimes, one of the most important things people know about transgenderism is the bathroom issue. That couldn't be farther from the day-to-day reality of living, of whether we have policy around a bathroom, right? So, for example, at our church, because our church uses public spaces, we have a campus, but many of our campuses are in public spaces. So, if you were to come to my campus at Lincoln Theater on U Street, on the bathrooms covering what are traditionally man-woman signs would be a sign that says all gender. Now, because our church only uses that space on the weekend, out of respect, we leave those bathrooms alone. Now, I suppose if that ever became an issue, uh, and I say that I hate that word issue, but if it ever became a concern of someone, I suppose at that point the church may have to say, okay, what is happening? Let's check things out. But I think the fact that we leave those signs alone, it's not a political statement. I think it's a acknowledgement that where there is no issue, where people are being people, let's not make an issue. So so the rush to create policy sometimes distorts the conversation beyond human to human interaction into kind of at times a fantastical world. Like, is it conceivable that a man will put on a dress for the sole purpose of going into a restroom to harass women? Of course, that's conceivable. Um,
Mhm.
is it a problem? And does that problem match what we're talking about? Someone who believes they this is who they are. They're entering this space. Pastor Marion mentioned almost on a spiritual level, they're entering this space because it is who they are, with no other malintent. For us to rush to make rules of prohibiting that says, I'm more concerned about this remote possibility than I am about just respecting you as you say you are. When you come in peace, you come to use the restroom. I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing the concern, but I think that sometimes the rhetoric around it takes us to a place that's so far from us as Christians seeing other people, seeing all of who they are. Because if you could see all of who I was in one instance, I wouldn't want that, first of all. But none of us would want that, because there are parts of us we're not ready for the world to see. This is no different. I, you know, that's how I see anyone that I disagree with. Someone recently said to me, and I can't take credit for this, but it's changed my life. Like, someone said to me, the moment I stop being curious about someone is the moment that, like, tr- I think from Spirit's perspective, that I've got trouble. Like, you're God's creation. And even if I hear you say something or I hear you do something that makes my feathers ruffle, that's about me and my pride. You're God's creation. And to the extent I can stay focused on my curiosity about who you are as God's creation, no longer do trans people become an issue or a political debate or a bathroom topic. They just become people. And it can happen. But it goes back to what Pastor Marion said. We have to be connected with one another. We have to worry more about people and not policy. And then it just all, to the extent these terms or these ideas cause feathers to ruffle, our feathers come down and we're just like, oh, this is my friend Devin. This is my friend Jeremy. You don't know whether any of those people are transgender or not. I just, okay, I'll stop. But I get it. These issues are so confusing. They were for me too.
So is there a difference between trans and drag? Is drag like a staging of trans, like part-time? I don't know the verb for the words for it, but
It's okay.
Let me give my lay answer, Pastor Marion.
Sure.
I actually had the same question. I had to ask, I will say this, Pastor Ken, I had to ask my trans friend that. And she was like, no. She told me, and I perceive them to be separate issues. I can't wait to see what Pastor Marion says. She's trained in this area. But I perceive it as a gay man. It's quite typical to go to a club and see a drag show. And those individuals will often, outside of that performance, not always, but often, um, identify and have their gender expression match their actual. Those people outside of the drag shows will often have a gender expression that is okay, not trans, but they do drag as a part of a performance just to have fun. Sometimes it's nothing more than fun, but
yeah.
not always. But I can see where the issue gets confusing, because I was confused at first. And my trans friend was like, oh, Jeremy, you have so much to learn. She was very patient with me. And I appreciate that. But I also had the same question. So I may be totally wrong, Pastor Marion. I'll pass it off to you.
Now we'll get the real answer.
The real answer.
That was a terrific answer. So we're going to just quickly go back to our gender unicorn. Okay. So gender identity. So thinking of drag queens, typically it's a male person dressing in women's clothing. That's a drag queen. Drag queen is also an umbrella term for dressing up in different ways. There are drag kings. So a female person wearing male clothing.
Okay.
So drag is a performance art, is what it is. It's used as entertainment. It's used as an art form. There's also drag theology.
Oh.
Fascinating, out of Latin America. So it's very interesting. But so back to gender identity. Typically, it's a male person. So male on the birth certificate. And out of drag, this person looks like any other man, generally. Whether or not they are physically or emotionally attracted to other men, whether or not they're gay, some are, some aren't, just like anyone else. Gender expression, often they are, when they're not on stage, often they have a masculine gender expression. When they're on stage, they have a feminine gender expression. So it's something that you do as a performance. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not someone's transgender. If you are, so I watch RuPaul's Drag Race with my kids, and it's really fun. And RuPaul, for anyone who's been following that show for a while, there's been a lot of talk about RuPaul for being exclusionary and actually transphobic. So for not liking trans people. And if you watch older versions of the show, there were different phrases that have been discontinued. So Ru, it used to be, you've got she-male. And then there was a huge cry about that, saying, wow, that's really offensive to the trans community. So they discontinued that. In the last season that just ended, one of the finalists was a transgender contestant. And there have been a few that have come out over the years. So actually, gender non-binary is the way they talk about who they are, but they're under the transgender umbrella. Gottmik is their name if you're a drag show fan. So long story short, drag is a performance art. It's different from cross-dressing. Cross-dressing is when I'm feminine. If I decided I wanted to dress like a man, that's taking gender expression and pushing it all the way. That's almost drag, really almost drag, but I'm not doing it as part of a performance. Drag always has some type of performance in it. Even if you're just going to walk down the street in drag, you put on a character. Generally there's a name. You have a different name that is your drag name, and it's like you're putting on a whole different person. And some people are gay, some people are straight, some people are transgender, some are cisgender. That's the other word, which means that who you are inside matches your birth certificate. That's called cisgender. So once again, it goes to the person, and you can say to your friend who does drag, wow, tell me more about your drag. What's that like for you? And usually people who do drag have just beautiful stories of what it means to them to be in drag and different things. So when you meet a drag queen, ask them, how'd you come up with your drag name? Tell me about your hair and your outfit. They love to talk about it.
Pastor Marion, I'm glad that you brought up that it's not just gay folks or transgender folks who might perform in drag. Straight folks do it too. In fact, in DC, we have a nationally recognized high heel race. It's every October. People come from all around the region. It's huge. It's mostly straight men who dress in drag with some gay men and some more typical drag queens who might perform in gay bars. But it really is a performance art on some level. Again, that to me underscores why really no one is accepted from this conversation, because this is now well beyond what anyone could say. Even if you had a traditional theology about gender or about marriage, these are this is a performance art on some level. It can't be dismissed and put off to the side of things that I don't need to know about that, or that's not for me. It may not be for someone, but not understanding it means that we would um, miss out on like how people express themselves, even in a way that fits with a traditional theology. Because the straight men who come and perform, and it's fun, it's meant to bring people together, and it does. People, that event is so hard to get to. So I'm glad you pointed that, Pastor Marion, because again, this conversation started with, okay, let's talk about the letters in LGBTQ and how far do we want to go. But where I think it has headed for me is a personal reminder that there is no dimension of humanity that I don't want to be curious about. Even if I were to perceive a dimension of humanity, something that I shouldn't be curious about something. When I'm dealing with humans, I want to be curious about humans. That's a fundamental going in proposition for me.
I love that. So Kim, in your context,
Yes.
Yes. Does this topic come up? And if it does come up, so the topic of gender, transgender, all of that, how do people talk about it where you are?
Well, it's well, mostly one-on-one in my context. Maybe there are some who can share in larger groups about it. I would say among younger generations, it's more easy to talk about. I think that it can easily be taken as a political issue of freedom or oppression for the conservative part of our culture. Um, and I know in another recording we did, you'd ask about had our denomination any statements on trans, and yeah, I went back and looked, and I haven't found anything there specifically on that or how anything said about it. So I can only guess for some other things and then kind of figure some things out. So I just found that really interesting. I think that might be a byproduct of us not talking about it very much or very deeply in very thought-provoking ways, because I think that there is fear there of the whole subject, and just that we're against it, or just male, female, that's it, and it's no more discussion. But in a culture where we have this gender fluidity and we are called to all people to take the gospel, then it becomes a barrier for us if we can't find our way through with conversation, like unable to hold our beliefs and then also have relationship while holding belief can be very hard to do. And that's why I mentioned appreciation for the graciousness that you share. So I think that's kind of where it's at. I do see some congregations that are doing some very smart things where they are offering what they call a family restroom, which is just kind of, the place where everyone else can go who can't get into the women or just men's room. That can be if an elderly husband or wife is taking care of the other elderly husband or wife, and they can go in there and care for their loved one, for a parent needing to take care of their children in the potty. It's just a whole plethora of things that even someone who may feel challenged with gender on which place that they may belong could choose that as well. I don't know what their perception is of using the word family for restroom, but it holds something warm for me. So I would hope that they would feel that they're part of family when they use this restroom. So, and then, there's, thoughts about, as I mentioned earlier, ministry for men or women, and then what to do with those. I think maybe people can pick what they feel that day, or just know who's going to be in those groups and choose accordingly, or choose that they don't even fit in either one, and that it's okay to be part of just generally what the church is doing in ministry. And I don't see the church doing as so much gender specific ministry anymore, like just men or just women. I'm not seeing that as much anymore as maybe we have had in the past. I see us all getting out and being part of community ministry together, instead of more, the guys are going to do this and the girls are going to do that. I'm not hearing as much of that anymore. But when it comes to camps, that would be in the mission trip thing that you mentioned, where you're dealing with overnight stays and stuff. That is interesting. And I know that our colleges, our Christian schools, I think that if they have anyone that has gender questioning, usually just stays off campus, though they are welcome to be student. But then I don't know specifically about all the forms that they sign either. So I'm not very good on that conversation on the details. But I do know that things like the Equality Act and what it might bring for those spaces has caused some discussions about wow, what do we do? What do we do and hold our doctrine? How can we be gracious and hold doctrine? And that we believe that we can, but how do we do that and be faithful to our beliefs? It's really something else to have conversations over.
Yeah, I can see we have a lot more on this topic to cover. This
Yes.
needs to be like part one of several. And Jeremy, 1 second. Kim, you said something that I just want to clarify a little bit. You were talking about choosing whether to be in a male group and a female group, and you said, well, it
Yes.
depends on how someone
Uh-huh.
feels that day. So to say to you in all love and with the greatest respect, so for transgender folks, one of the biggest stereotypes out there is it's just kind of a whim, like, oh, today I'll be this gender, today I'll be that gender.
Yeah.
For 99.9% of folks, I won't say that there isn't that one person somewhere, it's something that is very deep inside of them, and it's a long process to be
Yeah.
able to get to saying, "Okay, I need to be in that group, not in this group." And one way I suggest people think about it is, say you've spent your whole life waking up, looking in the mirror, knowing that you're gonna see yourself as a female, like I do, like you do, and one day you wake up, you look in the mirror and you look like a man, and you're like, wow, what is that? I'm female. People who are transgender, so many of them feel that way. They look in the mirror and what they see doesn't match who they are inside. So it's not just okay, well, I think today I'll use the ladies room, tomorrow I'll use the men's room. It's a really serious internal thing. It's who you are as a person, kind of like who we are as Christians. Like we don't just, it's not like, oh well, tomorrow I'm not going to be a Christian, maybe I will be the next day. No, I'm Christian to my core, and I know you are too. And it's the same with gender. Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing clarity to that. I
Yeah,
really
it's saying
appreciate
that
it
in all love.
because I didn't understand it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why it's good
Thank
we're
you.
talking about it in this grace space
Hmm.
where we don't get everything right all the time, but we love each other. Jeremy, yes, what were you gonna say?
Well, I loved what you said, Pastor Ken, because it reminded me a lot of the concerns you were talking about did surround policy of like thinking about an issue in advance. When I think about policy, I frame that as let's talk about a potential reality, a potential situation, and what we might do should the situation arise. That's a policy approach. Having going to a church where transgender people come, um, it feels so different because uh, when my transgender friend attended an all-female group at our church, she also has shared with me about that. And what I picked up from her sharing, and I want what was this? It's so much different. It's so much easier when it happens, right? Because she was attending this group. She's a she was born as a male and transitioned much later in life. To Pastor Marion's point, she would share that her reason for delaying transition was professional. She held a very notable position in society and was concerned what may happen with that position should she transition. But she did later in life, and she was attending a small group, a women's group, and she shared how accepted she was. And I can only imagine when you're in a relationship with someone, you didn't see them as a potential concern that could conceivably arise because it's just the person attending the group. I think the biggest concern I have in this space is that we've been wired to think of potentialities, of policy, of things as issues when we have to rewire. Jesus would have us rewire our thinking to see the human. And and in the power of the Holy Spirit will guide us into right treatment of that human. Now, if we end up before encountering that moment when the Holy Spirit brings two people together and they interact, if we spend too much time thinking about the potentialities of what may go wrong, may go right, what issues may arise, it's almost like we show up to the interaction with like but it's not. It's the total opposite. when we're led by the Holy Spirit, we're loving folks. It also, this same reality applies to all the other things that divide us so bitterly. So bitterly when you find out someone thinks the complete opposite that we do politically. I have to apply this to myself. I have to think to myself, I'm dealing with a human. It's all the same stuff. It just so happens that in the realm we're talking about, the issues are so much more pronounced because they've been pronounced for us. But we interact with each other all the time on a daily basis, and we don't know all the things we bring to the table, but we just form relationships. We love one another. We don't love each other in certain moments, and certain things we bring. We get irritated with one another. We love each other, but we're irritated. It's just part of existence. Just for whatever reason, topics around transgenderism get so exaggerated that it distorts that this issue is no different. This reality is no different than every human interaction. It's just interacting with other people. Maybe that's oversimplifying, but that's where I keep going. And this conversation was so fruitful, so
That's
fruitful.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think this does need to be the first of several conversations.
Yeah,
And
because I want to talk about gender dysphoria and
sure.
like,
Yeah.
have you ever heard of anyone that did detransition at all? I mean, those are just
Yeah, there are things that
more questions in the back of my head that are coming
Yep.
forward, and I'd love to talk more about it sometime.
Let's do that. And those of you who are watching, please send us your questions about this and other things for us to discuss together. And we're going to be adding guests too on our show. And if you are interested in being a guest, I hope that you'll drop us a line. We're coming to the end of our time today for this episode. I feel like we could talk forever about this, but we'll return to it. I know we will. I want to say thank you to my friend, Pastor Kim, my dear friend, and my dear friend, Jeremy. Thank you both for being here. I look forward to next time.
Same here, Marian. Good to be with you and Jeremy.
Bye-bye.